Today is February the 6th. This is the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Dick Rhodes. I chair this committee. I'd like to call this to order at 9 a.m. If we could stand and pledge allegiance, please. We do have a quorum today. One of our members is not available, and she may be online. I don't know if Christine, are you online by chance? It's okay. We know that she may not be. I do have a couple announcements I'd like to make. We are going to, when we ask for comments, we've been doing this in person, that everyone has identified themselves by name and their rec numbers, and we're going to ask that the same thing be done for all of those people that are watching this on YouTube, that they identify their name and their rec number. And the other thing I want to do, and this was a suggestion that came from one of our owner members, and it's a very good suggestion. We want to identify all of the committee members on the dais this morning, and we'll be doing that so you will know who the people are and who's talking. To my immediate right, to my far right, is Lynn Kellis. Lynn, this is her first year on the board. We're very pleased to, on the committee, we're very pleased to have her. Mr. Gary Bosack. Gary is one of our more seasoned members. Mr. David Miller, this is his second year on the board, and we appreciate having David as well. Ray Davis. Ray is our Secretary Pro Tem today. We rotate the secretarial duties to all of the committee members, and he gets the honor today of being that. So, to my left is Mr. Dwayne Parsons. Dwayne is, this is also his first year. Mr. Frank Bagnato is not here, but he is excused. And this is his second year on the board as well. So at that, now that we've made all the introductions, we'll proceed. As I said, we have a quorum. I want to propose the minutes of January the 16th. Is there any changes or amendments to that? If not, we'll accept them as written. And I'm going to ask Cliff Swan to introduce our guests from CapTrust. We're very excited to have them here. They come in and give us a report on the performance of our investments. So Cliff, if you would make the introductions for me.
Thank you, Director Rhodes. I'm happy to introduce Nate Erickson and Carol Romney from CapTrust. Nate is our principal financial advisor, and Carol is our relationship manager financial advisor. They're here to present our fourth quarter 2023, reserve fund investment performance. And keep in mind, they're presenting the fourth quarter of calendar year 2023, which would be the first half of our fiscal year.
So before you start, Nate, I do want to comment. If you have questions for Nate or Carol, please wait until after their presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions or to make comments. So, okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk through a few economic slides, and then Carol will present performance on the portfolio. So just some highlights here on broad overall markets. It was a very good fourth quarter. That's represented by the shaded bars for most asset classes. Equities represented here in the two right columns or three right columns, and then emerging markets over here all had a good fourth quarter and a good full year. Importantly for this portfolio, given that it's 90% fixed income, the bond market had a very strong fourth quarter, up 6.8%, and brought overall bond returns for the aggregate index up 5.5% for the year. So that was a big tailwind for markets and for the portfolio as a whole. I'll talk about why that happened in another slide, but we like to frame looking ahead, presenting kind of both sides of what potential factors could impact the economy and the markets, and we call it headwinds and tailwinds. We do think broadly from a headwind standpoint, so things that could create challenges. Consumers remain strong. People are still spending money. They're just spending on using debt more so than savings. So there was a lot of excess savings post-COVID, and that's pretty much been spent, and now people are starting to use credit cards a little bit more. So that's potentially concerning. The housing market's a big part of the economy, and that's slowed down quite a bit with the rise in interest rates. So we've seen a lot of transaction volume decline and not as much turnover there. And so given that it is a big contributor to the overall economy, hopefully if interest rates continue to move down, that picks up, but otherwise that's potentially a headwind. We've got an election in the US. We know that. That creates some uncertainty. Interestingly, 60% of global gross domestic product, or GDP, countries have an election this year. So it's an election year in a lot of the world, which can create some uncertainty, not necessarily based on the outcome, just the unknowns of who's in control and making decisions. And then, last year, I think if you asked economists going into 2023 what they thought the year would look like, most of them would say we expect a recession, and that didn't happen. And as a result, you've got a lot of optimism. People are feeling good. Things turned out better than expected. And that optimism is carrying over to 2024. And if you don't get the results you hope for, that could be a headwind, as well as people might be, their expectations may not be met to the extent they hope they are. From a tailwind standpoint, we do appear to have avoided a recession. So this term soft landing has been talked about a lot. We seem to be headed in the right direction from that standpoint. We're still seeing strong wage growth. The unemployment rate remains low. We're seeing strong job growth. So the job market remains very healthy. We're starting to see a pickup in productivity, particularly related to artificial intelligence. And there's a number of government-funded programs that will be deployed in 2024. So that presents a tailwind as well. This chart's interesting. It looks at historical performance of the stock market on the left-hand side and the bond market on the right-hand side around when the Federal Reserve finishes their rate hiking cycle. So there's been several periods of time where the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates to try to slow the economy when things get overheated. That's effectively what they did coming out of COVID when we saw 9% inflation. And so this is just showing data around what happens when they hit the last hike and then the subsequent 2 years afterwards. And so what you'll notice is different time periods represented by different colors, and generally the stock market tends to do pretty well, with the exception of the 1999-2000, where you had some other stock market challenges with financial fraud and the dot-com bust. And the bond market tends to do very well post last rate hike. And so I mentioned before, the fourth quarter was very good. It was around that time when it was fairly clear from the Federal Reserve that they weren't planning to increase rates anymore. They felt like inflation was generally under control, and going forward, we anticipate seeing some rate decreases now. And so I think this is consistent with what we've seen so far, and hopefully what we'll see over the next couple of years. And then I'll just spread this last slide again, because the portfolio is 90% fixed income. You see along the left-hand column here a number of different types of bonds. So different maturities of treasuries, 2 years, 5 years, 10-year. TIPS is an inflation-protected security. And I want to point out the yields, which are pretty healthy, 3 and 4%. And then if you go into some other sectors of the bond market, corporate bonds, high yield bonds, MBS is mortgage-backed securities. Generally, the bond market overall has pretty healthy yields to it. And this chart on the right measures what happens in each of these different sectors when interest rates move up 1%, that's on the left-hand side, or down 1% on the right-hand side. So when interest rates move in a certain direction, that changes the value of the bonds. And importantly, if we are at the end of a Fed rate hiking cycle and rates are expected to move down from this point, we think there's the potential for more appreciation in addition to the yield to come should we see rates fall. So, went through a tough period of time. 2022 was definitely challenging for a portfolio like this, but I think we've seen some recovery in 23 and hopefully more of that to come as we look forward. Oh, I lied. I have one more slide. Just touching on inflation, I think this is a big concern among the Federal Reserve, among the economy as a whole. Broadly, this measures different factors or contributors to overall inflation. You can see them broken out over here. We hit a peak of 9% in June, right around 3% right now. And you can see how some things have trended down. Importantly, this bottom blue is shelter, so rent and owner's equivalent rent. And it took longer to grow, and it's taking longer to slow. Basically, if nothing else changes, the expectation is that this will continue to slow and inflation should naturally trend down over the next several quarters, barring any other unknowns that could pop up. But on the right-hand side, this just is the same data, but it breaks out the shelter piece. And the highlight here with the transportation is just the fact that you've seen an incredible increase in car insurance rates. You've probably all noticed that. And that too is unsustainable and expected to continue to decline. So those two tailwinds should just naturally lead us towards lower inflation over the next several quarters. The Federal Reserve's target's 2%. And the closer we get to that, the more likely they are to cut rates on the front end and hopefully ease financial conditions overall. Again, going back to this slide, should be good for everything. So, okay, that was my last slide. I will turn it over to Carol to talk about performance.
Good morning. Looking at this column here, current year to date, that's 2023. So looking at 2023, we started the portfolio out with $30,505,000. $4.8 million was taken out for projects. Happy to report recovery in comparison to 2022 of over $2 million in the portfolio, ending us up with about $27 million at the end of the year. A good chunk of that recovery was in the last 3 months, as Nathan had pointed out in the market commentary. 1.6 million came in the last 3 months, and we're right about there right now. We're February, and we're still right about 27 million. Since inception, the portfolio started out 28.7 million. Net contributions, 423,000. And then the net investment return, minus 1.3 million, which brings us to the number we're at today. We continue to manage the portfolio according to the investment policy statement. Our mandate is to manage it 90% fixed income, which is this light blue area that you'll see here. Putting that into numbers, total fixed income, there's our allocation and our target. For equities, U.S. and international equities, we're right around the 10%. We continue to manage the portfolio according to that. Cash allocation, if you're wondering, we don't keep a whole lot of cash, excuse me, in the portfolio, about 50 basis points, which is 0.5%, less than 1%. The reports are as of December 31st, which is just a snapshot in time. And at the end of the year, you get a whole bunch of dividends that come in, and all of that has since been invested. The IPS calls for a 20% constraint in any one security, meaning that we cannot invest more than 20% in any single security, and we are to remain diversified across the fixed income sector as well as our equities. You'll see here the percentage of each asset is under 20%. So what does the portfolio performance look like? In 2023, the portfolio had a 7.61% return. This did beat the benchmark for the portfolio of 7.13%. The benchmark is consistent. We've applied a consistent benchmark, which makes up for the fixed income portion is compared to the bond aggregate, US bond aggregate index. For equities, it's a broad base Russell 3000 index. And then for international securities, we compare that to our all world country index minus the United States. So comparing to 2022, we know the portfolio is down 11.59%, also beating the index for 2022. And nice recovery. The investment policy statement has us constructing the portfolio and managing it for a long-term horizon, which includes 3 to 5 years. It specifically spells that out. So I'm happy to report that in just 1 year, we're seeing a nice recovery from 2022. Beating the benchmark, most of the securities in the portfolio are passive, which means they're very low cost and they simply just follow an index. So you may ask, well, how are we beating a benchmark? We take a very thoughtful approach, and when there's large macro movements, like the steep increase in interest rates, we're able to adjust the sensitivity to certain bonds in the portfolio. We can't predict the markets, and I can't promise you that we will always beat the benchmark, but we will always take a thoughtful approach to the portfolio. I'm going to skip through all the details. If you need some reading material at night, just pull up this package, and all the details in there are super fun to read. So I will point out a couple things on the portfolio here, because it is 90% fixed income. For our finance folks in here, currently the duration of the portfolio, which just measures the sensitivity, the bond sensitivity, is about 4.92 compared to the ag, which is right around 6. So we are tilted slightly less duration in the portfolio compared to the bond aggregate. Expense ratio, 0.05%. Very, very low cost. This is the expense ratio for the individual securities. That expense is embedded into the performance of each individual security, which is very low cost. SEC yield, which is just looking at a 30-day yield for the portfolio, 4.45%. So on a approximately $27 million portfolio, I believe that's pulling in about $1.2 million in yield, which is quite significant. When the portfolio was constructed, the yield would have been 2% or less, which probably would have been $500,000 or less on the same portfolio. So although we've seen interest rates go up, and on conservative bond portfolios, there is that short-term drop in capital that we see. With higher interest rates, we are yielding a lot higher on the portfolio. It is throwing a lot more cash into the portfolio. And with that, I think we'll take questions.
Do we have any questions from the committee? Mr. Bosak?
Nathan, on page 6, you made the comment kind of at the end of what you were talking about, that you expect bond appreciation in the future. What are the primary drivers and reason for your optimism about that?
So I can't promise it, but
Understand.
yeah. If we've hit a peak in the federal funds rate, and their target is a 2.5%, so we're talking about the rate that banks borrow on an overnight basis, which is currently between 5.25% and 5.5%. So most investment economists would say that's too high to run the general economy at. That's why the Fed is targeting 2.5%. You expect in a normally functioning economy where they feel comfortable with inflation that they're going to get to that level. So naturally, if they're reducing the short end, there should be some what they call term premium, meaning I should get paid for owning a longer term bond. But the thinking is something like 2.5 on the short end to maybe 4.5 on the long end. As Carol mentioned, we're a bit shorter duration, so we're probably most sensitive to the middle of the curve, like 5 years. And so if you expect those rates to come down, that should provide some appreciation.
I do have two questions for you. And I'd like to go back to page 6. And this is really a question for my own clarification. You showed the impact of a 1% rise or fall on interest rates. And just for an example, if you look at the mortgage-backed securities, if there was, it was from a 10.6 to a negative 1.2. Does that 1.2 come off of the 10.6, or is that actually an 11.5% swing?
Well, so you have to think about it as though it's a full year's return, and it incorporates the yield component. So let's say at the base of it, you're going to earn the MBS yield. I think my eyes aren't great, 4.69 or 4.7. Am I right? Yeah. So I'm starting at 4.7. If rates increase 1%, I subtract from that 4.7 the impact of the rate increase based on the duration. That gets me to minus 1.2.
Okay.
If rates fall 1%, I add to the 4.7 the impact of rates falling. That gets you to the 10.6.
I have one other question, and I believe this was on Carol's presentation. It's actually on page 13. The portfolio, when you compare our performance to the benchmarks, these are passive accounts, but we still beat the benchmarks. Now, the benchmarks have hundreds of accounts in there. Tell me again how we did that. I mean, these are passive accounts.
Yeah. So it really has everything to do with our positioning around duration or the risk exposure in the fixed income portion of the portfolio. So the benchmark we're measuring is the Barclays, or I guess it's Bloomberg Barclays US Aggregate Bond Index. They keep changing the name. It used to be the Lehman Aggregate Bond Index. And that has a pretty consistent duration because that's meant to represent the entire US bond market. It's mostly treasuries, what they call securitized, like mortgage-backed securities, and then corporates and a little bit of high yield. And that doesn't really change because it's the entire bond market. So if duration is a measure of risk, and that was a 6, at one point during the year, we were probably around 4. When yields got higher, middle to back half of the year, they went up to, the 10-year went up to about 5%. We actually increased duration a little bit at that point, so we got a little bit longer. And then when rates fell again, we got some tailwind from that. So it's around the risk exposure to that index, which is why we added excess return. That's what Carol was talking about, thoughtfully building the portfolio. There's thinking around that the aggregate bond index is not the smartest because it's what they call market cap weighted too. So you're lending money to the most indebted people. So whoever's issuing the most debt gets the biggest percentage of that index. And we just don't track that index with our allocation. We try to be a little more thoughtful about it, try to generate some additional yield with the positioning that we own and the lowest cost securities we can incorporate. And I'll make one other point. From inception, I think that was October of 2021, I think. So it's about 95 basis points, and that's net of our fee. So we've covered our fee and added probably around a couple $1 million of value relative to the benchmark if you had just done passive.
Well, I just wanted, that's what I thought, that since these are still a passive account, you're still managing them. You're still going in and making adjustments and monitoring it. And it appears that, and you said it was 95 basis points, which is equivalent about 1%. So
yeah, which is not $2 million, $200,000. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say so.
Yeah,
but that's commendable. 0.5% in a 7.5% world is really good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions from the committee? Okay, Mr. Bosak.
This doesn't relate to your presentation, but just your general knowledge of the things you pay attention to and work with all the time, because most of us don't. Inflation in the last 3 years is almost 17%. And so many of the expenses that we've incurred from some of our suppliers have been baked in. And people tend to forget about that. And just because we're down to 3%, a little over 3% this past year, there's this apparent euphoria that we're on the right track. Is there ever a reversal of any of those kinds of things, other than I'm talking industries more than I am individuals, but is there any future hope that that's going to be something that we don't have to continue thinking about and paying for?
So I'll answer what I think you asked, and if I'm wrong, let me know. But it's rare to see disinflation or deflation in an economy. And so when we talk about slowing inflation, it's a little bit counterintuitive because you think about, oh, that means prices are coming down. No, they're just not going up as fast. So I think to your point, you've seen price increases in a lot of inputs, whether that's supplies, whether it's labor, and those are not going to go back down to levels we saw 3 years ago. Hopefully they're just going to grow at a slower rate. The scenarios where you see deflation or disinflation, it's a really bad economic environment. You've got high unemployment, it's a prolonged period of time. I don't see that happening. And frankly, that's why it's important to have a diversified portfolio that has exposure to some inflation type investments like equities, because those costs get passed through and you want to participate with that as much as possible. So did I answer the question you were asking?
Not sure I probably asked it very clearly, but you did a great job of figuring it out.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Okay, we'll open it up to the floor. Any questions and comments from the floor? Give us your name and your rec
My
number,
name
please.
is David Bennett. My rec card number is 137887. I just had clarification. You said you can't hold in the portfolio anything more than 20% of any of the positions. Does that include like treasuries and things as well?
The FI 12, if I'm calling that correctly, states specifically we can't hold more than 20% in any individual security.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, there's no questions online, so if there's no other questions, I want to thank you for coming. You did a very good job. I appreciate it
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
We have item 3.02, and we'll have Mr. Carl Wilhelm, if he would take the podium, please. Thank you, Carl.
Good morning. Thank you, Director Rhodes, committee. My pleasure to be here this morning. We are presenting the February revised FY 24-25 project planning process of proposed capital projects. We do have some changes to share with you this morning, and then a follow-up presentation of items over $50,000. So as I mention every single month, this is a continued document. We've already completed September, October, and November, December, January, and we are in the February column, continuing any changes, any discussions to project costs, new items that come up from discussions. And in this list, I always start off with Keller categories that represent new, reserve repair and replacement items out of the reserve study, both for departments and golf, separated. And our last category is allowances. Moving into the document, you will see that we have our first change is the tractor and backhoe discussion from our last few committee meetings. I will go that in a little more detail in my presentation since that's a 55,000 plus item. But the price, due to competitive bids coming in, you will see that that's been lowered to $55,000. Moving down the list, the Metal Shop Climate Tech HVAC control system, after receiving bids, you can see that that has gone up a little bit to $36,135. After doing a little bit more homework also on the pickleball monitor station proposed by the Properties Committee, my original facts and findings were more assumed on the actual structure. Now that I have that documents from the vendors, I need a little more infrastructure for setting that unit and electrical. And infrastructure, so that's moved up to $30,000. The general manager has asked staff to provide pro shop flagpoles at 3 additional golf courses, Desert Trails, Echo Mesa, and Trail Ridge. So 3 components of $9,013 each have been added. And in our new categories, those are the only changes. Moving over to repair and replacement items. Our first change is in a new line item called the NEC phone system. When I give my presentation, I'll go in a little more detail on that, and Katie O'Grady is here if you have any questions. But we are adding $130,000 for our NEC phone system, which is the infrastructure changes of equipment that exists and is allocated on our reserve study. Landscaping vehicles had a little bit more of a review. 1 less vehicle was needed, and the price was reduced to $90,989. The copier machines for admin, it has been determined that the price is somewhere in the mid $20,000 range, and the general manager and accounting have determined to make that purchase right now out of allowances and remove this from the FY 24-25 capital budget entirely. So that's why you're seeing a 0. Moving on, we had a reduction in units for the landscaping greens roller, and you'll see that reduction in determining of whatever that vehicle style or looks like. It's $15,034. And those are the only financial changes in our typical departments. Now we're moving on to the golf reserve repair and replacement items. You're going to see that the golf maintenance equipment was reduced from 23 pieces in previous discussions down to 19 for a reduction to $992,838. Patio furniture at Deer Valley was increased $5,000 due to the just the evaluation that we had kind of forgot that we expanded that patio. So the original $10,000 amount was increased $5,000 more. And those are the only changes in the golf categories of repair and replacement items. And then finally, in the allowance categories, there are no changes. Our total is still $420,000 in general allowances for the items such as well pumps, safety and structural integrity items that come up, unexpected facility improvements, equipment, energy conservation needs, information technology changes, and ADA compliance upgrades unknown. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. And like I said, I have a presentation to give as well.
So before we go around, I do want to make some comments that I want to remind everyone, including our committee, that these are all proposed expenses. Nothing has been approved, no money's been spent yet. So we will go through a pullout later, probably in late March, maybe early April. Well, for all of the items 50,000 and over, we will take them item by item, specifically the new capital. Is that we'll go item by item, but there's no sense in doing that today. So if you have questions regarding the item, I think it's fair to ask, but I don't know that we need to get into a lot of narrative commentary on it. So yeah, Ms. Kellis?
Yes, Carl, actually, you may talk about this more as we go through what you're going to present. But my question is regarding the tennis courts, excuse me, being made into racquetball courts, and the pushback on that has been parking mostly. I'm wondering if anybody has looked at, maybe this is a bad idea, I'm not in tennis, but looked at the R.H. Johnson tennis courts and perhaps considered putting racquetball courts, pickleball courts there instead of reusing them as tennis courts, and then perhaps use the other ones that just resurface them or do whatever maintenance you need to do at Kuntz.
Based on just this week's discussions, general managers staff meeting for Monday, we have new information that I'm going to present today and talk about that in a little more detail. You're not going to see new information necessarily in presentation slides, and that's just only because of the time frames that we have to publish for these meetings. But I'm going to publicly talk about that this morning in greater detail.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Very good question. Anyone else?
I had one.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Parsons.
The golf page, second one down. Maybe I misunderstood or misheard, but I thought you said it went down. It looks like it went up.
My eyes are just crossed up. It looked like to me that it went down. I'm sorry. So it is Bolden, and this information is directly from the accounting team and Todd Patty. So my apologies for saying it went down. But the equipment factually is reduced from 23 pieces to 19. So the justification for then an increased cost, I am not aware. I would have to get you an answer on that.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Pete?
I actually know the answer on that. We get our Toro price
Pete, would
quotes.
you identify yourself so
Pete
people?
Finelli, I'm the reserve analyst for the association. So throughout this capital project or projection budgeting process, Carl's stating frequently that we're constantly still evaluating pricing, and on the approximately 19 and piece of equipment and on vehicles and the dozens of other items up there, we're constantly evaluating whether or not the pricing is valid. And on November 1st, Toro came out with their most recent price quotes, and we evaluated how we were structured on our reserve study amount and had about a $10,000 increase.
Thank you. Dwayne, do we have anyone online?
Yes. It's from Michelle Berner, rec card 127597. Where did the $40,000 spent on the library roll up into? Please give an item breakout of the unexpected facility improvements.
Cliff, would you do?
Okay, so the 40,000 we spent this year, to come up with some conceptual designs. First of all, that money was spent to be able to move it to the next step, which is being requested in this year's budget, and that's to continue design work to get a more firm price work and just other design items that need to be taken, infrastructure, things like that. It was a conceptual design that needed to be done so that we could get some kind of ballpark on the price of what it is that we wanted to do. Those funds, those $40,000 was spent in this year's allowance funds bucket. So it's not reflected in next year's allowance because it was spent this year. Hope that answers the question.
It is, and I would also like to, I would also like to say that the $40,000 was actually spent by the general manager, and it was within his spending allowance.
Yes, and all allowance funds that we spend are presented monthly in our financial presentations. So we've been presenting that we spent those funds since we spent them. So we present them every month. We give a rundown of all the allowance spend that goes into that capital item. So those are all reflected monthly.
Thank you. We do have one other person online, but they haven't identified themselves. So this is an opportunity for them to, if they would like to come back in online and identify themselves, then we'll read your comments. But if not, then we won't read them. So if you have, Carl, if you have another presentation, please proceed.
Yeah, part two to this is our monthly review of the same information that you've heard, but we narrow it down as the months go by, and this is for capital items over 50,000. This will be the last presentation that you'll see for items over $50,000 beginning next month, and also in April, we'll be reviewing and narrowing this down to items 100,000 and greater until we get to the point where all committees and the governing board are making decisions on the overall budget. So to start off at the Sports Pavilion Lizard Acres Bar Room, no changes from my last presentation, $225,000 proposed for this new capital project. 40 new linear feet of bar and top, 2 walk-up points of sales areas, static seating for 160 to 80 persons, maintains Wii bowling, darts. It does include new coolers and sanitizing equipment. We are relocating some of our existing equipment like a 3-compartment sink, 4-tap beer cooler. We would be adding a new 2-tap craft beer cooler. This does include architectural and engineering involvement, so we would be following the modifications to lighting and electrical controls as needed. And but it would also include all the costs for bar framing and decor items for the room. Moving on, we have the library expansion renovation design, architecture and documents for $100,000. Probably the most important thing to know on this $100,000 request is that these are funds as needed throughout the next planning season for the library. They are earmarked, so if the architects or follow-up discussions from any of this season's planning for the library, this would take us into the opportunity of having 60% plans made so that we could get an overall cost for a fully finished library expansion to be reviewed in a future year's budget. So it's not a hard spend of $100,000, but as the process goes along, these are the funds that are available to make all those planning steps available to us. Moving on, Beardsley Park, iron fences with gates, $57,500. Again, this is a 4-foot tall iron fence. Matches existing fixtures that we have at Beardsley so that we can enclose the park and control events and save costs and labor in putting up and tearing down a snow fence seasonally. Moving over to the R.H. Johnson tractor with backhoe, you will see the reduced cost from $75K to $55K. Facilities maintenance, Russ Boston has done a lot of homework here. Facilities maintenance equipment is seen in the photo, so this is the real deal. $55K is directly quoted from Kubota dealer versus higher competitor pricing. We expect the tractor to be set at a useful life of 20 years. It does help us with the rapid response time, reducing facility closure timeframes. Our average use has been 10 times per year with multiple days in the rental process. And those costly rental fees are about approximately $400 per day. And it would also eliminate the costly staff time away from site and time to make repairs. Remember that rentals are not always available in our climate or market, and reduces the need for subcontractors to be hired. Moving on to the tennis facility renovation and court conversion. As I mentioned with the library, these $50,000 allocation is for funds that would be needed in case the architects and engineers need funds to get us to a place of project planning documentation. Committee member Lynn Killis asked a very good question at the beginning of this. We've heard from the community, especially the pickleball club, that they're not really interested in this program. So staff has been discussing it quite diligently. The thought concept coming from general manager and staff is that we would like to move forward with a program that gets pickleball placed on the R.H. Johnson pickleball or tennis court system. So I know that discussion has been an elephant in the room for a long time. We do feel that it's more cost effective to put pickleball at R.H. Johnson Tennis, but that reduction comes at a cost to tennis. We own a facility at Kuntz that, the question is what to do with it. So the idea that this $50,000 funds would be for the development of a plan that would return this to a tennis court facility, no pickleball included in that plan and concept idea. So we have 6 courts there now. We would like to move forward with this proposed idea to renovate the Kuntz facility. So if there were approximately 6 courts reduced at R.H. Johnson Tennis, and this would be the opportunity that basically it would balance it out, and that Kuntz would have a refurbished facility, all tennis, keeps the tennis program balanced, 2 different locations, of course. Some might argue the fact that, no, it's not really a balance. We already have 6 courts at Kuntz. They're just not playable. There's a truth to that, but tennis numbers don't necessarily justify the fact that, 6 additional courts would be needed to offset a change in programming at the R.H. Johnson Tennis facility if pickleball were to be converted in there with a portion of their courts. So more to come, but I hope that answered your question. And I'm sure we anticipate much discussion on this, but the plans moving forward for the Kuntz Tennis facility renovation would be $50,000 for me to develop plans with architectural team, redesigning the center for 6 tennis courts as it stands today. Moving on, Kuntz outfield fence replacement is our first repair and replacement item. We have moved from the new capital request to repair and replacement, $495,000 to replace the outfield fence. No changes to that plan. Silvercraft remodel, millwork and countertops, $375,000 to renovate that facility. And you'll see at my notes in the bottom of this presentation, for full transparency, that also includes a reserve study item of LVT flooring replacement, $23,850 additional, and the grid ceiling and sprinkler head replacement due to the unique timing of this remodel, which adds $38,000 to that project as well. Palm Ridge outdoor pool deck surface replacement, $186,266. Again, this is a replacement of our existing surfaces and moving to the new rubber that we have done at Kuntz and R.H. Johnson. Palm Ridge Activities and Aquatics Building flat roof restoration, $160,000. The benefits of our roof restoration program, it extends our warranty to 10 years each time this is, we are capable of doing this. And generally, we get a few more years above and beyond that based on the great products that are being used. And this eliminates the opportunity for having to have a very, very costly full roof removal and replacement. Palm Ridge Fitness Center cardio equipment. This is a 2-component request. We have this slide for $159,000 for all of the cardio equipment. Just a reminder that we do rec centers on cardio every 5 years. So every year there's a rec center, and then a year that is nothing at any rec center. Moving back to some flat roofs, all of our roof scenarios are the same dynamic. So R.H. Johnson Admin Building, 10-year roof warranty extension and recoating. The next line item is a new line item that has been added. This is the first time you are seeing this. It is the Rec Centers of Sun City West NEC phone system upgrade. For $130,000, we have the opportunity to change our system technology and upgrade it. It moves phones into new SD-WAN infrastructure. The chart that you're seeing on the side, there are components within that whole system that have the opportunity of being replaced. Not the entire system is needed. It upgrades and saves the rec center $7,000 per month in lumen fees, and the return on investment is 18 months. Retains multiple pieces of equipment components, utilizes existing vendor relations, and takes advantage of the SD-WAN's LTE backup. Moving on, recreation landscape vehicles 3, $90,989. Palm Ridge indoor pool deck surface, same thing as the exterior. Rubber decking to be provided in the interior for $71,648. Palm Ridge Fitness Center, this is the part 2 to the Palm Ridge Fitness Center equipment replacement. Our strength equipment is over 25 years old and over 20 years old. We expect a 25-year useful life out of the new equipment. The manufacturer over the summer season made a reference to us that the existing equipment has no more parts or service available to the old equipment. RH Johnson has another area of roofing restoration and extends the year 10 years for the roof warranty. RH Johnson Facilities Maintenance pickup truck replaces an existing truck, 2010 Chevy 2500 replacement. As a courtesy, I've included all of our HVAC that's in the repair and replacement study. So you'll see an item that is above 50,000, Kuntz 5 units, but I've also included all the other air conditioning units throughout the campuses that need to be included in the proposed capital list. Todd is not with us today. He has another meeting to be at, so I'm going to do my best in sharing his slides. In the capital budget, moving forward to, I'm going to let you read this at your leisure, but the first capital item is the $5,050,000 irrigation replacement at Echo Mesa. No changes, other than maybe Todd discussing timeline, full closure of the course. Nothing that I was made aware of that I needed to represent today. Moving on to capital budget maintenance items or pieces of equipment. 19 units for $992,838. You'll see the breakdown of those units. And then also the 13 vehicles, light and heavy duty utility carts, pickup truck, dump truck, $357,689. And the next slides represent the breakdown of each and every one of those items in a reserve study tool. Two components. I have a Desert Trails Pro Shop parking lot asphalt replacement, similar to what we did at RH Johnson, Trail Ridge, Grandview in this past approved budget season. And then finally, golf carts for golf ops, 20 replacement carts, $129,792. Our last category is allowances, and again, you see no changes that I expressed earlier, $420,000 in the allowance budget. Any questions?
Could I get a clarification before we start? Carl, on the Kuntz project, are you going to change the verbiage that's on the document that describes the actions to be done on that new?
Our next
The next
meeting in March,
iteration.
you'll see a whole new presentation slide.
It'll have new verbiage, because I think that's a major issue. The other thing is, if you could clarify something for me, the Silvercraft Club, their R&R request is $375,000, but there were two projects that I believe you said, and one was for roughly $23,000 and the other one was for $38,000. It's roughly $61,000 that looks like it's on later in the lineup of the items that are. So would that come off of that $375,000?
No, sir. $375,000 is for the repair and replacement item in our reserve study tool for countertops and millwork.
Okay, so the $61,000 is over and above that.
Yes.
That was for ceiling and I think flooring.
And then when we do such a major
Right.
renovation, we take
Right.
other areas into consideration. So now is the time to do the flooring and also the ceiling replacement.
Okay, already, that's good. I think that would help everyone when they start the questions. So I'm going to open this up to questions to the committee. Yes, Mr. Miller, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, Carl, just a clarification, if I could. And maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought in one of your more recent presentations, you had said you had gotten some new millwork people that you were talking to, and that you thought maybe you could reface it. And now I'm seeing difficulty in procuring refaced millwork vendors. So something fell through? or-
No, I've had the same verbiage in every presentation to date, and that is a fact, but I have had a very positive interview with a new millwork company within the last 30 days, and did a very strong site tour with the set of plans that I have from architect, and they are interested in providing me a quote for both reface and the new work that I'm waiting on, new millwork, and I'm waiting on that cost.
Okay, great. Now, so the cost that you have here for the 375 is for a total new millwork, not just refacing?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
It's
it's just-
trying to, it's best estimations with the people that I have had discussion with. So
Okay.
no matter how I get the job done, whether it's reface or new, right now we are at a solid dollar amount.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bosak?
I got a few, Carol. Maybe not all for you, but where are we in the presentation order with properties and charter clubs? And we're the first ones to see this, or the last or second?
This month, you are the first,
Okay.
but this week, charter clubs, I'm not on their agenda, so that's
That's this afternoon,
fine.
right? Yeah.
Slightly insignificant, you know what I mean? But if I'm on their agenda, I'd be happy to give this presentation. But also this week is properties,
Okay,
and then the governing board workshop.
great, okay. What conversations are ongoing, or is there anything current happening in regards to the library project? Or is everything kind of just sitting in limbo?
It is sitting there with a concept design that, that we're hoping that the public has interest, and from what they've seen that you have, it's online, and that's where it stands. And if, based on the governing board decision at the end of this budget process, we'll determine whether we're moving forward with a next level of information for.
Okay, so nothing will happen with the library until the end of the planning season, so to
Of
speak?
this budget that
Budget
you are
cycle.
working on right now.
Yes, okay. If I remember the last meeting, we asked, matter of fact, Christine may have initiated this, but a prioritization by the governing board of key projects, the 6 or 7 that were part of the initial long-term plan. Is that still something that's going to happen, but not today? Okay. Got it. It's great to see a project where we get an 18-month payback on this NEC system. Congratulations, Katie. Is this all behind-the-scenes stuff, or will we see an improvement in the phone systems in the pro shops, for example, or anywhere else within the property? I told you they weren't all for you.
And while Katie's walking down, another question I would have in regard to that is, what's the lifetime of the new equipment? It's great that we get an 18-month payback, but
So,
Katie, would you identify yourself so those that are?
sure, Katie O'Grady, General Services Officer. So this is just a portion of the equipment that's going to be replaced, and it's not necessarily an upgrade for upgrade's sake. It's Lumen is sunsetting the equipment that connects our external sites to the outside world, and so we need to replace that equipment. That equipment, the connections, the circuits that we pay for Lumen, 12 of them, for all those external sites, and then in and out here at RH Johnson, that's where the savings is. It's the monthly circuits with Lumen that we're going to see that huge savings with. Because they're sunsetting some of their technology, not all of it, we do need to replace basically the phone brains out at the external sites. The stuff here at RH Johnson, most of it is not going to change except for the single circuit replacing the 12 circuits. That's where that savings comes from. All the phones will remain the same. Most of the other infrastructure will remain the same. And so that's why we're kind of doing this earlier than the reserve study would show. So as far as the pro shops and that, if you're talking more like the call center type, it's not going to make any changes to that. If they're looking for a true call center, that's a whole software system we would have to bring in and install. This is not designed to be call center software.
So it's all behind the wall kind of thing, that nothing that anybody's going to be visually impressed with out in the community?
No, unfortunately, it's
Okay.
going to be a savings and it's going to be a technology upgrade. The one big thing is that, if one of those Lumen circuits fails now,
that site that fails is down and out. Right now, moving it over to the SD-WAN, it has a LTE rollover. So if the main circuit goes down, it rolls over to cell phone service, either Verizon or AT&T. So that's a huge improvement, but unfortunately, it's all behind the scenes for the most part.
Thank you. Maybe this is Russ's world, but last Wednesday, we had a power outage at Trail Ridge when we were cooking hot dogs. And you're probably aware of it. No, you aren't. We had hot dogs for you, Carl. The whole thing, the whole building went dark. And they had to run around trying to find a place where they could get power so we could cook hot dogs. It was, my question is, can we make sure that something is being done to evaluate the electrical system over there so that doesn't happen again?
I'll share that information
Thank
that's
you.
spoken today with Russ.
Thanks. Last item, a number of years ago when we were remodeling, if you will, Stardust, we were trying to make it more playable because they had far less rounds of golf played there than any of the other courses. We took out, I think, 13 sand traps at the time. The original recommendation was about 20, but it was both for safety and make the course more playable. It just dawned on me listening to the presentation, I should have talked to Todd about this a long time ago, but the reason we only wound up with 13 because we engaged the men's and women's clubs in the conversation. And they had valuable input and actually bought into what we were going to wind up doing, but they didn't want to emasculate the course. So that's why we did the reduction. Might want to do the same thing with Echo Mesa. If we're going to go through all this renovation work in the course, if there's something that the clubs think they could need or use or would improve, either the playability or the ambiance, whatever you want to call it, of the course, it would always be a good idea, I guess, to engage the men's and women's clubs of those specific courses just to get their input, if nothing else.
I think this is good discussion for record, and the general manager can help facilitate that.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone online?
I have.
Okay, and actually, I think you have one online that goes back to a previous conversation. So
I
if you
do.
want to go ahead and read that one.
Should I do that one first
Yes,
before my
yeah.
questions? Okay.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
May I
read it.
ask a question first?
Online.
Oh, Christine, are you online? I'm sorry.
Yes, I've been through the whole meeting.
Oh, good, thank you.
Good
Okay,
morning.
yes, please do. I didn't realize you were online.
No problem. Just to follow up, if I may, on Gary's point regarding, I think it was Gary's point regarding or your point, I can't remember which of you. There was a point regarding the project for the Kunz renovation. So Carl, I know you said that we're in the midst of rethinking some of that and so forth. As you rethink that and revise the description, can we expect to see a revised description in other committees, or when will we see that revised description reflected?
This was our first opportunity to share the information because we knew that it really wasn't fair that the representatives of the community or the pickleball club to just keep coming to the podium and discussing, we're not interested in this project. But based on the timing of how our discussions go and how these committees are scheduled, we have to get information out to the governing board assistant. And so you will definitely see a revival of this presentation and in the next month, but I'm going forward this month with the presentation that you're seeing right now.
Thank you. And for Chairman Rhodes as well, for the questions around the library, I understand that we're just going to continue to see the same project in there. We've heard both within our committee and also from the community several questions about that project. Will we just continue to see that line item as well going forward? And at what point, you had mentioned that the pullouts, meaning the removal of some of these items or not, will be discussed in March. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's late March or early April. I don't know the exact date yet, but that will still show as it does right now. This is all preliminary discussion.
Understood. Every project, that project and every project, regardless of the feedback we receive or provide.
Absolutely,
you.
yeah.
Dick, can I add one other thing?
Yes,
So the library and
Kate,
pickle.
this is Katie
Katie
O'Grady.
again, sorry. The library and pickleball and those other strategic planning items that we've been talking about and that the board has asked for a prioritization of those, we're preparing longer explanations, presentations specifically on those. So I know the library one's done, a couple of the other ones are done. Not sure when those will formally be presented. Once they are, and that conversation happens with a priority and, move it forward or don't move it forward, we'll be able to revise that.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you for that, Katie.
thank you. Do we have anyone else from the committee?
I had a,
And we have.
Just
Mr.
one thing.
If you'd identify yourself.
Yeah, Pete Finelli, Reserve Analyst. When we continue to update this, we're constantly evaluating all the items, as I mentioned earlier. And I have kind of good news that one of the 50,000 plus items was for 3 landscaping vehicles. And the landscaping department has undergone some discussions about their staffing levels and the vehicles to support that. And as I think Cliff and Carl mentioned, that in the blue section and the green section of the other document, you'll see what's items that are emerging from the reserve study. And if you just push one out, you're essentially pushing it to another year, which inflation will be added and things like that. So this one is going to be removing a pickup truck from the next presentation. And not only is it just going to be moved down the ladder, we're probably going to eliminate it from the reserve study. So good news on that front.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other? Okay, so Dwayne, if we have anyone online?
can I ask my question?
Yes, please do.
And then I'll get to that. It's concerning the Kuntz tennis facility renovation again. I think the whole thing started was because the pickleball club has gotten so big that they need more courts. And so using this money now for tennis instead of pickleball, it seems like we're not addressing the real issue. And what is the priority for, pickleball versus tennis? And when do you plan to recommend some things to solve the pickleball problem? Because it seems like we've got plenty of tennis courts already for the tennis group, but we're still lacking courts for pickleball.
So in our yearly disciplines of creating a capital budget, our first priority is always safety and structural integrity first, before new and just reserve study repair and replacement for replacement's sake, because of useful life. So we do own a facility at Kuntz that is sitting there, 3 courts chained shut, and quite honestly, it's blight. Based on the discussions of trying to help master planning move forward with the pickleball discussion, I think we've all come to the place in understanding that it's probably best at R.H. Johnson. And what are you going to do with the Kuntz tennis facility? So it needs to be remodeled. Ultimately, that is your discussion and the governing board's decision, but it is an item that we don't just keep kicking the can on our facilities and letting them sit there and rot. So you're being proposed with this. You have an opportunity to have any kind of discussion on it. But if we don't have the discussion, it's never going to get solved. So that is the course of action. Instead of impacting parking, we heard the recommendations from others about really don't enjoy the idea of having pickleball there. So renovating it as is, we feel is the best plan at this moment.
Bill Schwinn, General Manager. Just to touch on that a little bit, and a lot of these things are a bit repetitive, and I apologize for that, but we do have a strategic outlook that is coming forward within the next month, relative to a lot of the prioritized items that I know Christine has mentioned in the past, whether it's pickleball, whether it's our reserve study, a lot of the casual dining, some of the needs and wants of the community that have been addressed. So we have put a strategic plan together as far as where are we going in the future for you all to discuss, assess, prioritize, evaluate, and help guide us into the future. So when it comes to pickleball, when it comes to the Kuntz facility, we're giving it our best shot to be the most productive and responsive to a lot of the needs here of the community. And I think within the next 30 days, when this thing is presented, I think it should help answer a lot of questions and at least help guide this train down the track a little bit better. I hope that helps. And unfortunately, I tried to pull Todd out of a meeting to talk about trap reduction, but that meeting has broke and they're gone.
Thank you.
Just so I'm clear, we are picking up pickleball courts at R.H. Johnson based on your new proposal.
That is the discussion that is
Yes.
happening right
And
now.
you're going to convert the Kuntz tennis courts back to playable. That's what you're proposing. So
That
we
is
will have
correct.
more pickleball courts.
So the cost to convert tennis courts that are post-tension slab at R.H. Johnson already exist. And basically it comes down to then having the expense of converting them to a surface layout and adding the fencing that divides them up and doing it strategically so that they still get a component of courts that are lighted and a balance.
So when it's all said and done, how many more pickleball courts will be at R.H. Johnson and how many tennis courts will be playable at Kuntz?
I'm just going to say if we had the opportunity to convert one court only, we can, with discussions from pickleball community, 3 to 4 pickleball courts can go on one tennis court. 4 is ideal, but that a lot of times has to do with the directional of wind and sun, you know what I mean? So that is yet to be determined, and that would be a future capital discussion. But the icebreaker is now.
So from a budget perspective, we won't see any money spent in next year's budget, 2024, for the renovation or studies at R.H. Johnson for pickleball courts?
That is correct. That discussion would happen September of '24.
Okay, that's all. Have you have any more questions, Wayne?
No, there's a
If you
there's a
have
couple
some.
online. Okay. There's Mary Garnett is her name, Rec Center 133113. She has a couple questions here. One, I'm going to try to go back to, we may have already answered it. Excuse me. Okay, 40K has already been spent. She's talking about the library. I would ask that you do not spend any more money on the library project until you find out if the community, if this is something they want. Okay, just a minute here.
And yes, Dwayne, this is Christine, if you can
so-
hear me. I popped into chat while you were all working in the room, and I tried to clarify Dick's request in terms of identifications just asked for a rec card number. So there's a back and forth. You're welcome to read that out loud if you wish. And then there are other questions that the owner member, Mary, has asked as well. Just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
what went on there.
we've seen those, and I think Dwayne is working on that right now.
Yeah, so here's her second question. What software is the reserve study in that is utilized to justify a lot of your ongoing maintenance costs? Question. Who determines the life cycle of each item in this study?
Cliff, you try it?
Okay, so we have a very detailed reserve study. We manage it in Excel. It's a spreadsheet, and it's a living, breathing document. It changes daily, sometimes multiple times a day, and it depends on what we purchase and when we purchase it. Sometimes we eliminate things like Pete talked about earlier. Sometimes we replace things and reprice things based on the current value, but it's got a inflation factor built in it, and it has lifing built into it. And the lifing is based on experience. It's not tied necessarily to the general ledger. So for example, we may have something lifed per the depreciation schedule at a 10-year life, but it might actually have a 12-year life for us, or it might only, so the lifing is determined based on experience. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So I think that is the last of our questions, so we'll go ahead. Carl, thank you very much. We appreciate your, Mr. Elias, do you have a question? Do you want to make it? Okay, we've already been through on the audience. We will have one more from Mr. Elias. If you would go ahead and go to the podium, identify yourself with your ring. Then after that, we'll end this conversation.
Good morning. Thank you, Director Rhodes. Bruce Lees, 135422. I was just hoping for some further clarification on the pieces of equipment for the golf maintenance. You indicated initially they were going from 23 pieces of equipment down to 19 pieces of equipment. So I was hoping to understand, were 4 pieces just eliminated, or were some moved around because the cost went up $10,000? And so I'm just trying to get an understanding of how we arrived at that.
As Pete Finelli, our reserve study analyst, mentioned, that after review with Todd Petty and his department, right sizing of employee seats, equipment that might not be needed anymore was either eliminated, but also they received quotes from Toro, as Pete mentioned, in November, and pricing is up. So even though we've had the positive reduction, some pieces of equipment, overall equipment prices are up. So that's why you're seeing the difference in $10,000 that he mentioned.
Thank you. And could I also inquire as to the new line items for the flagpoles at the 3 golf courses? How was that introduced into the projected requests of budgetary money? And are we looking at need versus want? I'm all for Old Glory being displayed, but $27,000 is a considerable amount of money. So I was just looking for some comment.
Good question, sir. Bill Schwinn will answer that for you.
That's okay. I'll jump
No. Go ahead, Bill.
Bill Schwinn, General Manager. We do have 7 golf courses and 54 buildings making up our inventory here in Sun City West. Most of our larger buildings, be it recreation centers, have flagpoles. Several of our golf courses do, and some do not. There is a telephone transmission pole at Stardust that also serves as an American flag holder. And then we also had a flagpole at Grandview. When we did the renovation at Grandview, that pole came down. There were some dead trees in the area that we removed, and that pole was relocated. During that time, I had a couple of meetings with some veterans of the United States military that came into our office and just asked me why some golf courses and not others. I didn't have a good answer for that. We did 2 years ago, we didn't even celebrate Veterans Day here. We do now. I think it's a show of respect. I completely agree with the gentleman's request, and based on the allowance evaluation that our finance director talked about when it comes to general manager's allocations of funds, an $8,000 increase was put into this year's budget to put a pole per veteran's request at Deer Valley. That took place, and instead of doing this as a piecemeal effort, a decision was made by me as your general manager to honor veterans and put poles at each of our golf courses.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Pete?
Thank you. Say, the capital budgeting process actually started way back in August when all the reserve study items are sent to the managers. They, over the month of September and October, start to evaluate the need. Carl has mentioned this a number of times. And by December 1st, we show all those vacillations between things moving on, moving off of that list. To your point, what you didn't see was that in the initial list was about $160,000 higher And by the time we got to the December 1st, send to the GM after all the discussions from the committees, then we don't start bringing up the past of how we got to the January number. So it's only changing by these pricings or discussions about, moving forward. So in the slide, he didn't highlight it, but Todd does, that there was almost $160,000 delayed after evaluating that from the initial offering.
Thank you. We do have one more comment from YouTube, and it has to do with a question that Mary Gaynett had asked earlier. I think we talked about the $40,000, and she had a question in there: is how will we know if the community wants the library project? And what I would say to that is, for all of the long-term projects that we have taken on over the years, there's an extended duration of discussion. That's one of the reasons why we have it at this particular meeting and all of our committee meetings, so that it can be visualized and discussed throughout for public discussion. So I guess that's the response to that. We are making it public. We do want your input on it, so we don't know where it's going to go. All right? So let's go ahead. Mr. Bothak?
Just to add to that, broken record time, 2012, one of the three bylaw proposals by a group of residents was to have the community vote on any expenditure over $100,000. 85% of the 15,000 people that voted said that's a bad idea.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to item 3.03. It's a review of policy FI15, preparation of the annual financial plan. I will make some opening comments about this. We had this originally scheduled for back in September. We intentionally pulled it off because we wanted to hold it until we had the results from our working group that looked at the possibility of having some type of a financial index or indices. That report has come and been presented, and it was the feeling was we should kind of just leave well enough alone. There are so many checks and balances in it now that we're satisfied with that. There are some amendments that we need to do to it, so I'm going to turn this over now to Mr. David Miller. He has prepared the comments on that and any of the changes. So, David?
Thank you, Chairman Rhodes. This is the second year in a row that I have reviewed this policy statement. My review did not see any particular items that I thought needed to be changed. However, as you may be aware, there was a decision made last year that we would formally identify money that would be taken from the operating budget and put into the reserve fund as a particular line item. And so when CLA, who is our independent audit firm, came in and reviewed all our policies and procedures, in light of that decision to identify that line item, they suggested that we have an update to FI15. So the wording that's shown here on the screen came from CLA. Cliff and I talked about this, felt that it was a very reasonable suggestion, and it brings our policy in line with what our practice is. So with that, that's really all the comments that I have. Again, like I said, this is very straightforward. And so, Dick, if you would like me to, I will go ahead and read the recommendation. Okay. So the recommendation is the BNF committee recommends that the governing board approve the suggested language insertions to policy FI15 at section 6.3/subsections 6.31, 6.32, and 6.33 as redlined.
Second.
Okay, do we have any discussion on this? I would like to say that, just to echo Mr. Miller's comments, this basically codifies what we're doing now. It codifies the transparency of identifying money that will be targeted to go into our reserve fund. So it's probably more of a technical issue than it is anything else. No discussion? Any comments from the audience? Cliff?
Yeah, and to be clear, if this isn't changing how we calculate how much money we put into our reserve fund, nothing is changing there. That calculation stays the same. What this does is it calls out what portion we're estimating can go into the reserve fund and budgeting for that and calling that out monthly, which is what we're currently doing. But so just to be clear, we're not changing how we calculate what funds go into the reserve fund or what funds get pulled out. That calculation stays the same. It just identifies it on the financial statements. Just wanted to.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, do we have anyone in the audience?
My name is David Bennett, rec card number 137887. This kind of has to do with the question I asked earlier about the amount. It's just I know hindsight's 2020, but in 2022, when the bond fund lost 10%, $3.7 million, I think most important thing about the directions to those people is preservation of capital. During that same time, if the money had been in treasuries, instead of being down $3.7 million, they would have been up anywhere from 2 to 5%. That capital, treasury bonds were up during that period of time. I know you keep saying this is unresolved because we didn't lose any money because we didn't sell them. But if it's down $3.7 million, if they had put it all in treasuries, you would have been up 2 to 5% instead of coming from a hole and waiting 3 to 5 years to get back to that much loss of capital. So I just wondered if there's any way, instead of just a specific 20% across that in some very, very low risk or non-risk investments, you could have higher than 20%. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, committee and director. Is it possible to put that slide back up? I had a question about, I think, this item in the second paragraph. Yes, 6.3.1. The estimated reserve fund allocation will be established as a percentage of the member and associate member monthly revenue. So this, I'm trying to understand. We collect monies from the members and APFs and things of that nature, and part of that goes into the operating budget, and then part of it goes into the reserve fund. Is that correct?
So the reserve, everything, we work out of the operating account throughout the whole year. And then when we complete the year, we have an audit by CLA, and they do a calculation based on what our income from operations were, also, which includes our member dues and all of our operating expenses. Then they add in APFs, investment income, some other kind of just encumbrance, a couple other small items, and then they deduct what we spend for capital spend.
Yes.
Okay? And then when that's all done, the new and reserve study capital spend, whatever's left over or whatever we're a deficit, that's how we impact our reserve fund. So it's a very large calculation that includes many different things. But in income from operations, we collect member dues, we put them on the balance sheet, and we recognize that revenue monthly.
Yes.
So that's why we're calling out the fact that in this calculation, we're calculating it based on the member due revenue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So does that mean then that the percentage of the amount allocated will change on a year-to-year basis?
Yes, it can. So the idea is that it's a budgeted percentage every year. So we may need more to come from operations based on our needs for our reserve fund. So rather than just stamping that with, it's always going to be this percentage.
Yes.
We want to have flexibility, so we put that in the budget process. So what we end up having is a zero balance budget from operations, and the money left over from operations that would technically be in income from operations would actually be down in the capital section of the income statement, okay, showing as reserve fund allocation, estimated reserve fund allocation.
Thank you. Director, I request to ask one more question. So does that possibly tie into it? Let's say if our reserve fund is, we're supposed to be at 49%, currently we're at 51%. If we're looking to not be achieving those objectives, is it possible that more money would come out of our operating funds to beef that up to achieve that percentage? Or am I talking totally about a different topic?
Yeah, so the way you're talking about it as if they're two separate things. They really aren't. It's actually one bucket what's actually one bucket. But we can have some deeper conversations about this offline. But yeah, we can get into the real nitty-gritties.
Thank you, Committee and Director.
Important thing is we're not changing how we're calculating the reserve fund allocation. That's staying the same, okay? We're just trying to be transparent about how much money we're putting into the reserve fund in a specific line item versus income from operations.
Okay.
But my question is actually going to be going back to the.
Would you go and identify yourself and your
Oh,
record?
yeah, 131829, Nick Turner. But my question is actually going back to the capital items about pickleball and tennis. So I can, if I didn't, I thought we were open for general questions, but if we're not, I can go away. Yeah, I just.
We will. I think what I'd like to do, let's do this, and then after this is completed, then we'll have another round for final comments. Thank you. Okay. I think we've completed our discussion on that. So is there anyone online that has comments? No. So we need to take action on Mr. Miller's proposed recommendation that we'll forward to the governing board for approval of this policy. Start with Leland.
Yes.
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 Yes, so it would be announced as unanimous. Christine?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, it's unanimous. That concludes our formal agenda. And now I will open this up for committee comments. We'll start with Christine. We can start with you.
Thank you, Chairman Rhodes. I'm not sure if you may be in the room, you may be filtering some of the chat while Dwayne is looking at the at that pull down to make sure that you have live chat and not talk chat messages. You may have missed one. So I just wanted to ask us to clarify a few things for the folks who are listening in online. Normally and you might have said this, I didn't hear it, Dick, but when we started this policy of more interactivity for our owner members and online participants, we're still experimenting with a better way to allow people who are remote to participate. So we do take comments and questions at committee meetings and at governing board meetings via YouTube chat. It's not perfect, but that's what we do. And we normally announce that at the start of the meeting, and we normally ask people to make their comments and add a rec card. There was a lot of misunderstanding for the owner members who are online today, so I just wanted to clarify the intentions. I know that we can improve some of these, but it is still work in process on all of that. So if there are any owner members, this is the time for you, if you're listening, If you believe that your questions were missed, if you believe that that the folks on the committee did not address those questions, this is the time to speak up and to ask for that. Normally what we do in the room is when comments are made, we read those questions, we read the comments verbatim, provided that they're not, that they don't contain any inflammatory or profanity and so forth. So I just wanted to clarify that and ask those of you who are in the room to make sure that the chat window includes all chat messages and not just the top chat messages. It's an easy thing to overlook.
Yeah, I believe we've captured those, and we did go through that when we started the meeting. So do you have any other comments, Christine?
No.
Okay, thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, my comment goes back to pickleball. If we know the right answer, and we don't want to continue to kick the can down the road, as Carl said, I'm concerned that we don't have any money allotted in the 2024 budget to address the pickleball court shortage. So that's my concern. It seems like it's too far out in 2025 to start addressing this issue when we know what the right answer is.
Thank you. Mr. Davis?
No additional comments.
Okay. Mr. Miller?
No comments.
Mr. Bosak?
Sympathies and prayers to you, Christine.
Thank you.
Same.
We have any final comments from the audience?
Nick Turner, 131829. It's a question about going back to the pickleball and tennis. Is that do we have any information available at the moment which tells us how many hours a week and at what times of day the pickleball courts are at full capacity? And have we got any forecasts working with the club or looking at growth of pickleball nationally as to know how many pickleball courts we would need next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years' time? Because that needs to feed into the decisions that we're making. Because I don't know that if we put another 6, 9 or 12 pickleball courts in the R.H. Johnson tennis complex, whether they would be fully utilized at peak at this time of year. And at what rate of growth would the club need to achieve to hit that? And that would help with timing. But we have a long lead time, as Dwayne said, we have a long lead time on these projects. And if we think we're going to hit capacity at this time next year or in 2026, we need to be planning now for that capacity. Otherwise, we're not just be kicking the can down the road, we're going to be chasing it. So my question really is, at this peak time of year, which we're at now, how many hours a day or how many hours a week are the pickleball courts at 100% capacity? And if they're not, when do we expect that to happen?
I think that's a very good question, and I'm not sure that, I know that there's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done by the pickleball club and I suspect by others as well. But I'm sure that when we start the planning for the physical plant, that's all going to be critical and vital to what the information that we'll need. I don't think I can really answer that question directly, Nick, but it's one that has to be asked, and it's one that we're going to have to keep on the table. Thank you. Mr. Elias?
Thank you, Director. Bruce Lees, 135422. To remind the Budget and Finance Committee, and through that, maybe the governing board, the Pickleball Club did in fact submit documentation in April of last year for that specific renovation at R.H. Johnson with diagrams. I believe in previous meetings of that time, those were actually brought up and discussed, but eventually ended up being tabled for one reason or another. However, there is documentation that exists relative to this topic, so we wouldn't necessarily have to revert to starting from ground zero to initiate that process. We could possibly revive that document and move forward. Thank you.
Coke Schaefer, 118548, President Pickleball Club. Okay. The courts are not just for the pickleball club, they're for the community. We try to leave some of the courts open so that the community can play on them. We don't know when they're coming or how long they're going to play. So we try not to fill the courts all the time with our planned programs. And I get a lot of complaints from people who say, the pickleball club reserved those courts and I wanted to play on them. So we're kind of in a, they're community courts. Everybody can play on them. It's not just pickleball. On the other hand, you're talking about spending $100,000 for the library. Do all the books get checked out at the library all the time? You can't expect us to have those courts full all the time. It's just not the way things work. That's not the way tennis works for certain. That's not the way any of the clubs work, that they have to have that capacity in their rooms or in their courts or all the time. It's just not realistic that it be used 100% of the time, all the time. There has to be some time when the community is allowed to play on those courts, that club members are allowed to play on them, but not necessarily club members. They're community courts.
Thank you. Do we have any comments online, Dwayne? Nothing. Okay. So it is 10:42, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Oh, wait, our next committee meeting will be February the 20th at 9 a.m. That's a very important date to remember, because that's when Mr. Schwend will be presenting the proposed budget for next year. Okay. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.